I'm thrilled to be here today. I have to tell you, I have so much admiration and respect for Simon because a couple of years ago he came to me, we were talking, and he said, hey, I'm writing a book. And I was like, well, that's a really futuristic thing to do. And I said, well, what's the book about? Because everybody in LA is writing a screenplay or something, some torrid romance about housewives or whatever. And he said, it's about social media. And I'm like, oh yeah, we need another one of those, right? A book about social media. And so I asked him what his angle was. And he said, it's about marketing and social media. And I thought, wait a minute. Social media is about honesty. It's about being direct. It's about being candid and vulnerable. What are you going to tell marketers to do? Believe it or not, he actually figured out a way to bring those two concepts together, and I think it's one of the most useful books I've read in the subject of social media. So if you have a copy of it with you in your goodie bag here, I encourage you to delve into that book. It's a useful book. It's got really practical information. It's really well researched, and it's beautifully written. And then about a year after that, that book was rolling out. Simon was excited about that. He came to me again and he said, hey, I've got another idea. I'm starting a conference. And I said, oh, that's a cool idea. What's it going to be about? He said, social media. I'm like, oh my God, the world doesn't need another social media conference. He said, no, this time it's going to be a practical workshop where people actually get a chance to kind of work through a plan. And when they leave after 2 days, they're actually going to have a completed workbook with a plan for them. And believe it or not, he's actually done that. So if you look inside of that workbook that you've been working with the last couple of days, you're going to see almost step-by-step a taxonomy of every strategy that you can use to be successful in social media. And Simon's really done the work for you in an amazing way, really. It's about as difficult to use that book as it is to order from a Chinese restaurant because he has all the options. All you have to do is kind of circle the 2 or 3 that you think you'd like to try to do. I'll have 2 Twitters, 1 Facebook, 1 Foursquare, right? It's like selecting from a menu. So I'm impressed by all of that. But there's one catch. Which is that this medium moves so swiftly, it changes so fast, that the information in that book is going to be outdated fairly soon. And so that plan that you leave here with, I hope that you go execute on it. I hope you're really prepared to go put that into action fast, because in about 3 or 4 months, that really won't be the plan of action anymore. It will have evolved, I guarantee you. So really consider that a starting point. Now, in inviting me here, Simon asked me if I could help give you one more set of tools. One more set of tools that will take you beyond what's in that book and what's beyond what's inside of the workbook that you've been filling out. A set of tools that will help you figure out a strategy in the future. Because this medium moves fast, how can you navigate in this medium and know where you're going? Make sure you don't careen into a wall or crash your car. How can you navigate? And so the challenge I've got today is to figure out how to convey to you navigation without a map. That's the title of the talk today, and that's what I'm going to try to help you with. It's a fairly tidy half-hour presentation. I'm going to jump right into it. Simon asked me to talk a little bit about my background. People ask me what I do. What I do is I invent the future. That's what I do for a living. For about 20 years, I've been launching new services. And believe it or not, just like clockwork, every couple of years, a new platform comes along. 20 years ago, it was satellite TV outside the United States. Cable TV isn't really as big outside the US as it is in North America. Mostly outside the US, people get their television, pay television, from satellite. And so when I was just beginning in my career, that was a very hot and booming business. It was brand new. And I went over to Asia and I launched a whole bunch of cable TV networks over there, I should say pay TV networks on satellite over in Asia. That was great fun. And then I came back and I launched one of the world's first game companies for computers in 1993. It was when computers just started to have multimedia screens. And that company was a big success. We went public very quickly. And so I got some great feedback from that. In fact, at that point I said, I'm never going back to television. Just a few years after that, I was recruited by Sony to come in. Now, Sony Pictures, like all the movie studios, had websites to promote their movies and TV shows and so forth, but they didn't really have a commercial strategy for programming on the web. So I was their first head of programming and became their first senior vice president of digital media, where I launched all of Sony's online games, their soap operas, and their first interactive television programs. And then toward the end of my time there, around 1999, I started getting interested in mobile. Because I've been working in interactive TV. Interactive TV really depends on your set-top box, and that depends on your cable operator or your pay TV operator. Well, those people move very slowly. And I looked at the number of units we were shipping. At that time, they were selling about 400 million phones a year in the mobile business, and I thought that was breathtaking. Now, the phone at that time, very clunky. It was a black and white screen, didn't have great battery life. In this country, didn't even have great cell phone coverage. So naturally, I jumped into a company that was launching video on mobile phones. The very first video on mobile phones, Packet Video Corporation, and we launched that in 30 countries around the world. And I teed up all the content partnerships. I worked with 350 media companies and 2,000 developers to launch video on mobile phones. And back in 2000, this was considered audacious, crazy stuff to do. But I had a really clear vision of how it could work, because to me it was very similar to cable or pay TV, because a mobile network is a closed infrastructure, it's proprietary infrastructure with subscribers. And it's like, sure, you can put video on that system. And sure enough, lo and behold, we did. And today that's quite a popular service, and it's a multi-billion-dollar business. And since that time, I've had the opportunity to launch many other things, online conferences, online seminars, and so forth. So I've always been at the forefront of launching something new. There's a computer scientist named Alan Kay, and he has a great quote. Alan Kay said, "The best way to predict the future is to invent it." That's my motto. I've adopted that as my credo in life. So what I'm going to try to do today is give you a quick course in how to predict the future and actually participate in it and perhaps influence it. Major media, traditional media, broadcast media, the media that we grew up with, is going through a tremendous transition right now. It's been my conviction that the TV business has reached its zenith, and it's about to go into decline. That's the traditional TV business. We're consuming more video than ever, and we're consuming it on more devices than ever. But the habit of sitting down and watching television, I think that habit is about to change forever. And so I offer this first thought, which is that buying time in a one-way network is kind of a futile exercise if your goal is to engage people. It's a very difficult thing to do. The advent of social media gives us, as marketers, the opportunity to connect with people in a way you never have been able to do before. Marketers always say, oh, we like to get in a dialogue with our customers. But how sincere are they about that statement, really? If you're buying time on billboards or buying time on television, you're not really in a dialogue, you're just pushing a message at them. Social media gives you a chance to invite them into a conversation. So for today, what I'm going to do is give you a quick course, 2 questions, 6 trends. I'm going to really build on some of the trends that Simon just shared with you. And if time permits, I'll do 1 bonus for you. First question for you, fad or trend? How many people in the room think social media is a short-term fad? Very good. Simon, it's working. How many people in the room think that social media is a long-term trend, a long-term trend that's here to stay? I should hope that everybody would raise their hand. Very good. But you may work for organizations that feel differently. Does anybody work for an organization that says, oh, come on, it's short-term? Okay. How many people who have been overwhelmed by all the new stuff they're having to deal with and contend with in social media wish that it was a short-term trend? Maybe that's a different question, right? Sure. Internet by the numbers. Let me put that first thought to bed once and for all. So these are new numbers that were published by Pingdom. It's a website that tracks this information from a variety of different sources. There are about 2.1 billion people using the internet through landline services, and a further a billion reaching that through mobile phones around the world today. So just about a third of humanity, a little bit more than a third of humanity, is using the internet. 2.6 billion instant messaging accounts. 2.6 billion. That means there's more people using instant messaging than people who are actually using the internet, individuals. That means people have multiple accounts. By the way, this is not new stuff. Instant messaging, the first IM system for Unix computers began in the late 1970s. So this is fundamental to the architecture of the web. This is part of the two-way network. This is what you do in a two-way network, is you send messages back and forth. 2.1 billion social network accounts, 800 million and growing. You know, Facebook is long on their path towards 1 billion users. Imagine that, a company that's 7 years old with 1 billion users. 350 million of them access it through their mobile phone. Twitter has now exceeded 225 million members. And Google+, which is a relatively new service, it's only about 6 months old, already has 62 million users. It is the fastest growing piece of software that's ever been introduced. It's the fastest product launch ever in terms of take-up and traction with customers. And many industry pundits predict that there'll be 400 million people using Google+ this year. So you can go from 0 to 1 billion faster than ever before in this medium. That is one thing. Velocity is really, really a key feature of social media. It moves really fast. 70 million WordPress blogs, Tumblr, and 39 million Tumblr blogs, and so on. And I can give you more stats, but the point, I guess, is quite clear. We're talking about large scale. Now think for a second, if you're familiar with media buying, think about television audiences and think about how much they've declined. You know, the primetime television audience in the United States in, say, 1980 was about 95% of the American households. And today it's about 25% of them. And so a hit TV show today will hit somewhere around 10 million viewers. That's tiny by these numbers. That's not going to change. That's the trend. Traditional media is going to fragment and the audience sizes will decline, even if it continues to remain for a very long time, which I believe traditional media will be around for a very long time. But the audiences will fragment. In the meantime, the social audiences are going to grow, and they grow really, really fast. One of the reasons for that is that social media and digital media in general is not bound by the traditional constraints that traditional media have. So if you think about broadcast media, it's usually defined by geography. There's licensing rules. It's defined by language. So for instance, people in Mexico might be able to get an American TV show signal, but if they don't speak English, it's irrelevant to them. So even if the signal can leak over the border, the language is a barrier. And then, of course, distribution platforms. So if your house is in a neighborhood that doesn't get cable or satellite, well, then guess what? You're not going to get those services. And so traditional media is bound by those three constraints. Social media simply isn't bound. It is unbound. It has the potential to grow to reach all of humanity. One of the projects that I'm working on right now is called The Next Billion Seconds. And we're predicting what will happen in the next billion seconds. It's about 31 years. And one of our predictions is that every human on the planet, all 7 billion of us, and by that point it'll be closer to 9 billion, every one of us will be connected all the time. What happens to humanity when the intelligence of all of us is connected, when we're all participating in these social services? And now you can envision a time, it's not too far away, folks, that's 2025. You can envision a time when there'll be several services that have audiences in the billions. It's quite an amazing number. It's quite an astonishing vista. Another way to answer the question about long-term trend or short-term fad is more like sentiment. How do you feel about that? How do you feel about social media? Do you feel positive or do you feel negative? Tell me, anyone in the room, who feels positive about social media as an opportunity? Great, fabulous, that's why you're here. And who feels negative? Yeah, fair enough. Don't be shameful. No, yeah, don't be bashful about it. I'm with you. It's like this for a lot of people. It's not about positive and negative. It's about opportunities and threats. Right? Now, imagine if you run a media company, a traditional media business. This stuff is an unambiguous threat. Instead of looking at social media as an opportunity to create a brand new relationship with your audience and get into a real dialogue with them that could be really valuable for the advertisers that support your business, instead of seeing it through the lens of opportunity, a lot of traditional media companies view social media as a pure threat. It's something that's got to be stopped in its tracks. So you've heard about SOPA, PIPA, ACTA, you may not have heard of. That's a European thing. How many people heard about SOPA? All the controversy, all that hoo-ha, right, recently in the press? So SOPA, the Stop Online Piracy Act, and PIPA, which was its counterpart in the Senate, which is Protect IP Act. These were kind of a blunt force instrument, right? A brute force way to try to control piracy on the internet. And the proposal was to basically cripple the address system, how the internet works, the DNS system that actually helps us find websites. And then secondly, to penalize severely any company that facilitated someone who was looking for, searching for, or someone who might be recommending a piracy site. This is way crazy overreach, and it had the potential to introduce real harm to the web. Now, the problem of piracy is a real problem. I want to make that very clear. I understand why the media companies are concerned. The problem of piracy is this. Today, a motion picture in the past had the opportunity to recover its cost and make profit for a period of about 36 months. When, 10 years ago, 20 years ago in the movie business, you had about a 36-month lifespan for that picture to be active, and then it kind of went into catalog. Today, a motion picture has to recover its cost in the first 4 days. Otherwise, they're going to be in financial jeopardy. And that's because the minute the picture is released, and sometimes months before it's released, it's already up on the web. A lot of this occurs outside the United States, where the FBI can't stop it. A lot of the consumption occurs outside the United States. And I'll be candid with you, a lot of it occurs in markets where that film isn't legally available. And so consumers who want to see it, they're going to find it one way or another. And so partly our old licensing laws, those geographically bound laws of licensing content, those rules, those business rules, they're kind of spurring piracy in markets where people have a desire to see something or watch something or hear something, and they cannot. And so they're going to find their way to it, unfortunately. Piracy is a real issue, though. It's starting to eat into the content companies' business. It's hurting their profits. It's cutting down their foreign business in particular. And a few years back in the 1990s, the Digital Millennium Copyright Act was introduced as a means of trying to control this, to try to govern how copyright would work. And it seemed to work all right. The only problem with it is the way it works is you have to send a takedown notice. So if somebody's posting content, then an attorney at the studio or at the record label has to send a takedown notice to that website. And this is like a giant global version of whack-a-mole. So you have these armies of attorneys that every day they're sending out takedown notices, and then the stuff's taken down, but it just pops up somewhere else the next day. And so in sheer frustration, the media companies decided to take some drastic action, and that's where the initiative for SOPA, ACTA, and PIPA, these really crude and overdrawn, overreaching legal mechanisms were drafted. Here's Rupert Murdoch on the subject. Talk about someone who's not really thrilled about social media. He's using Twitter to complain about Google's role in piracy. And look at what he says. The piracy leader is Google, who streams movies free, sells adverts around them. No wonder they're pouring millions into lobbying. Now, it's not really true, right? Is Google pirating? Of course not, right? I'm sure what he's referring to here is YouTube. Okay, fair enough, there's an open issue. There's some open issues around that. YouTube has had some friction in the relationship with the studios in the past. In terms of pouring millions into lobbying, well, the irony here is the motion picture companies, the movie studios, the media companies, and the big fashion brands that have copyrights, they spent millions lobbying for the SOPA Act. The technology companies spent maybe $500,000. It was like a 4-to-1 spending ratio on Capitol Hill. Now, the way Silicon Valley responded was actually quite interesting to this SOPA threat, because I'm telling you, this legislation had some really bad stuff in it. The principle, I agree with. We need to deal with the real issue of piracy, but this particular tool was not the right tool. The way I describe it is that there's a conflict between the architecture of cooperation and the architecture of coercion. I don't have time to get into this today. If you go to my website, which is my name, roberttursic.com, you'll find a video there that I gave about a year ago in Canada and again in Australia on this subject, and it's called Cooperation and Coercion in the second century of electronic media. My premise is that media businesses of the past have erected a business model of coercion, which is all about value extraction, getting money from customers. The media company of the future is all about cooperation, how to get people to participate. And they freely choose to spend money if they wish to. They opt in, but you can't coerce them. And those two business models are going to have a clash. That was my prediction a year ago, and here we saw it this year with this heavy-handed legislation, very much proving the point. So the primary concern about the SOPA and PIPA laws is that it would censor the web. It was an architecture of censorship, and this is a really big issue. Whether or not, no matter where you stand on that particular issue of piracy and this particular legislation, it's very important to be aware of this issue. Once an architecture of censorship is introduced, in this case it might be, the government might say, well, we need you to just do this to stop piracy. Well, then it's not a very big step for the government to say, and we just want to add in pornography, which is what they're trying to do in Australia. And then someone else will say, and religious defamation, and this, and that. And all of a sudden, you're going to end up in a world that is no longer the internet that we recognize, the internet of free sharing, free opinions, free sharing of information, abundant information. It'll become a world of geographically and culturally shrunken windows into content. And that's a really big concern. And so what happened was the entire internet went on strike. This is fascinating. So for one day, last week, the entire internet went on strike. Websites like Wikipedia took themselves down, put up a black thing there and said, nope, we're not going to be here today. So you can get a sense of what the world might be like if this legislation passes. Google put a black bar on their website. You can still search, but it's like a good reminder, right? For the hundreds of millions of people that come to Google's site each day, it's a good reminder for them to say, hey, this could be the world that you're about to get into if you don't do something about it. Here's Reddit. So Reddit was a company that was concerned about this, right? Because they're all about social, they're all about people sharing things in the feed. And so they were very concerned that they might be a target of this legislation. After 24 hours, they had some extraordinary results. 162 million people saw the Wikipedia protest page. 7 million people signed up for Google's petition to the government. And there were 2.4 million tweets. And actually, that number may have gone up because there was a little bit of momentum here, so it carried over past 24 hours. But perhaps most importantly, 8 million people used Wikipedia's tool to find the contact info for their congressman. Literally, this was a social protest. It was the first form of social lobbying that we've seen at massive scale, and the results were very impressive. Because prior to this protest, there were enough votes in both houses to pass this legislation. It was on a railroad track to passing. And after this, 24 hours later, 40 more representatives in both houses signed up for the opposition, decided to oppose it, and a whole bunch of the sponsors of the bill said, whoa, we're not taking on 162 million people, sorry. And they stepped back. Really amazing. That's the power of social media. This is here for good. This is going to be a part of our civil discourse. This is a new tool for citizens to talk to their government forever. The only thing that can stop the growth, therefore, of social media, I believe, is government regulation. And it is underway in certain countries. In authoritarian countries, very much so. Social media is monitored. Social media accounts are monitored. Your friend network becomes something that's very interesting to certain governments. They'd like to know who you're connected to and who you're influenced by. So the only thing that can stop the growth of social media is government regulation. And it appears that the only thing that can stop the regulation is social media. So what drives the growth of this medium? We see that it moves very quickly. We see that lots of people are using. What drives the growth? So here's my second question for you, quiz. What do the following have in common? Arab Spring, the rebellion in North Africa, about a year ago it started, right? The London riots of August. Do you remember that? They were burning stuff down in London, right? And of course, the Occupy Wall Street movement that started in September of last year. Anyone want to take a guess? What connects those three things? Yeah.
They use social media to organize.
They did. They used social media to organize themselves. That's very good. Someone said inequality. That's for sure true. There was a lot of momentum behind it. Anything else? There's actually quite a lot. Participation, very much so. Yeah, Twitter was a function of it. Okay, so some people dubbed the Arab Spring the Twitter revolution. Others called it the Facebook revolution. And by the way, the kids were spray painting Facebook and Twitter. You can see all kinds of photos of that. So they were real clear about what tools they were using to organize themselves. But here's what I believe connects these things. Because there's a lot. There's a lot of dynamics here. The main point for you folks, for marketers, is this: validation. WikiLeaks released those cables. Remember those cables came out and it was this giant scandal and the government was really freaked out. And then the government kind of figured out what was in the cables and they're like, actually, the stuff that's in here isn't that critical. So, they kind of downplayed it. This is like last October. Well, that's not really true. That was true from an American perspective. But included in those WikiLeaks cables was information from the US ambassador and people in his office in the Maghreb, in the northern part of Africa, including Egypt and Tunisia, where there were messages that said, we met with the leaders of the opposition groups. Well, this was news to the people in those countries. They didn't know there were opposition groups. They didn't know that they were talking to the American government. And all of a sudden they said, holy cow, I'm not the only person who feels this way. Holy cow, there's other people like me. And they got onto Twitter and they got onto YouTube and they got onto these social services and started to find out that they shared something in common. Validation is a very important driver for this medium. Validation is what unifies people. Because all of a sudden you find out that that feeling you had or the idea you had or the interest you had or that passion you had or that thought you had, things could be different. All of a sudden you're not the only one. And social media is how you discover it. You can find that out really, really fast. This idea of you're not alone is really powerful. I want you to think about that because every person here works either at a charitable organization or a company that solves problems for people. Most people live lives of quiet desperation. Most people don't have a really wide and diverse group of friends to talk to. A lot of people suffer in silence with all sorts of afflictions. Social media is incredibly powerful at letting you know that you're not the only person who has that situation. And you can actually connect with people and give you useful tips. There's a ton of social sites that are focused on this. The second thing is, you may work alongside somebody in an office for years and never know that they share a passionate interest with you when they're not in the office. Social media lets us discover aspects of our friends that we didn't even know about, because we never had the occasion to find out. Validation is a very powerful unifier. Validation is the thing that says, it's like a stamp of approval. It's the thing that says, hey, you're not alone, you're okay. The most powerful stamp of approval right now is kind of a crude tool. It's the like button. Now, you can like someone's photo on Facebook. You can like their status update, and you can like Wonder Bread. Like, what does like mean? And by the way, I think Facebook's got a problem here. They have to sort this out, right? Liking is getting to be kind of too broad of a thing. But basically it means that my attention is there, I'm validating it. And by the way, you know this, right? Every time somebody likes your thing on Facebook, they like your status, you feel great. It's addictive, right? That's validation. That's what I'm talking about, right? Every time somebody posts a comment on your blog, you're like, hey, I didn't waste my time writing that thing last night. Totally cool, right? Every time somebody shares your post or forwards something that you posted or somebody retweets your tweet, you're validated, right? That's a very powerful thing. So the question for the folks in the room here is, how does your company or organization use validation to build relationships? You see, this is not a broadcast medium. It's not just about pushing a message out. It's about getting people to come back to you. And one great way to do that is to validate people. Find the people in your field, find the people who are subject matter experts in a topic that's close to your brand, and validate them. So, how many companies here have a Twitter account, like a corporate Twitter account? Quite a few. Okay, about half. You know, that's actually true, too. If you look at the major Fortune 500 companies, about half of them are active on Twitter. Okay, and the other half are trying to figure it out. Who do you follow? Who do you follow? I've worked with so many famous people who have Twitter accounts, but they don't follow anybody. So what they're really saying is, I don't want to hear from you. That's what that says. When you follow someone, think about the power of validation. Oh my gosh, major corporation X is following me. You're humbled, you're thrilled, you're elated. That's the power of validation. Don't forget it. Use it. That's really key. Those are my first two questions. Let me give you the quick trend. So I do a show called This Week in Social Media. We cover these topics every single week. I'm going to talk to you about a few things that are happening right now. But I'm not going to talk about the technology as much. I know Simon set that up previously, showed us a bunch of new technologies. I'm going to try to talk about the social trends, the people part, because people are a part of this equation. First big trend, you know this, Facebook everywhere. They're very explicit about it, right? They're going to be on every device. I told you that 350 million people access Facebook through their phone. But their goal is literally to be everywhere. They want to move the perception of Facebook from a place that you go to a thing that you do. That's something that's woven into the fabric of your existence all the time. A good example of that is Mercedes-Benz recently announced that they are introducing the first fully integrated with Facebook Mercedes-Benz car. I love this idea. What does that mean? You know, Rob just broke the speed limit. Cool. Second big trend, all media will be social, right? All media will be social media. And Simon touched on this. I can go pretty quickly here, but it's important to note. Take a look at this. These are the companies, Copia, Subtext, Goodreads. These are social book services. You go, wow, could you think of a less social medium than books, right? A dead tree bound up in a hardcover that sits on a shelf. How's that social? These companies are figuring it out. And notice that it's not Random House or Charles Scribner that's doing it. These are the companies that are doing social magazines. So they take the news feed, they'll take your Twitter feed, they'll take your Facebook feed, and they'll turn it into a very pretty looking and easy to consume magazine. How many people have something like Flipboard or Pulse on their, yeah, okay, it's a lot of people. If you're not familiar with it, I urge you to check this out. And here's what's really interesting. If there's anybody in the room that has an advertising budget that would like to get into social media, none of these guys have sponsors right now. And yet millions and millions of people are turning to them as their daily newspaper. It's like a personalized newspaper. And if you have a tablet, you've got to get these services. They're fantastic. And get them all. Check them out. See what's different about them. There's a whole bunch more. Okay, how about these? These are the social music services. Mog, Pandora, Spotify, Turntable FM. You guys have heard about this, right? Big news recently because a couple of them were integrated into Facebook and it started showing up in your stream and you'd start seeing so-and-so's listening to Smashing Pumpkins in your feed. You know, so it's like your friends can broadcast out what they're listening to. You can use it as a music discovery tool based on your friend's interest, right? Again, do you see any major record labels here? Interesting. And finally, Simon also talked about this. This is social television. Get Glue, Mizo, he talked about those two things. Frequency, a company that's right here in town, there's social discovery for video programs. And Shazam, which is a company that came out of the radio and music space that's now moving into using their technology for people to help log in, check in to TV and participate. And once again, if you'll notice, no major media companies present, right? These are brand new startup companies. This is opportunity. These are the companies that are inventing the future of social media. This raises the question of whether content is still king. Now, we've had that mantra now for about 30 years, right? It came out of the cable industry. Content is king, because content companies can always dictate the terms of how their stuff is distributed and the price they get paid and so forth. Well, in terms of advertising dollars, content is really just a way to gather an audience. It's sort of like flypaper. It's a very expensive kind of flypaper. And it's quite possible that advertisers have been overpaying for that privilege for a very long time. And what these social media companies are starting to show is that they can find a way to aggregate audience for far less than the cost of content. And so they're starting to split those two functions apart. Now there's the business of creating content, and there's a new business of gathering and engaging audience, and not necessarily the same two companies. That is a gigantic risk for media companies, for the companies that run this town, Los Angeles. Third idea, social discovery. Again, you've heard the term, right? This isn't new. You're familiar with this idea. Social discovery means in a world where we're overwhelmed with incoming information, that our friends turn out to be the very best filter, the very best way to find stuff that's relevant to us. So you already know that you actually have a pretty big following, right? Because it's not just your friends that you're directly linked to or your Twitter followers, but then there's the people who retweet and so forth. So you start to get this cascading effect, your extended social network. So we've heard about that concept in social media for a while. What you might not know is that the weak ties, the people who are one hop away, the people who aren't really great friends, they're more like acquaintances that you may have met online or you may have met once or twice, but you linked up with them. Those people have tremendous influence over what we read, particularly when you get into these social magazines, these reader apps, because you'll start to see interesting stuff that you would not have found because these people are outside of your circle, right? They're a little bit further out and they have maybe different interests, and so they kind of extend what you're aware of. And so we are tremendously influenced. So what this diagram is showing is that someone who is a weak tie, someone who's a loose tie further away from you, maybe 1 hop or 2 hops away, they can actually influence you as well as your direct friends. So when we think about the social graph, we hear about that a lot, right? That's your friends. And then there's the interest graph. And then there's this extended social graph and an extended interest graph through that friendship, those circles, ever-extended friendships and ever-extended social graph. So the social graph, that's about friends, groups, activities, it's about people, right? An interesting thing here is that Facebook hasn't been that successful. It's surprisingly unsuccessful. I should characterize it as, of course they've been successful, right? 800 million people, they made $1 billion last year. They're doing great, and they're filing for their IPO and so forth. But one of the issues they have is they haven't been able to monetize that social graph quite as well as they'd hoped with advertising. So they're selling ads about half of what people expected them to be able to do. And what's worse is that their growth is decelerating right now. It's one of the reasons why they have to get out there and go public. Because that core business of advertising in the social graph might not turn out to be that great of a business after all. Pretty interesting, right? That's a challenge for them. The other side, the right side of this diagram, I think is a lot more relevant to marketers, and that's the interest graph. Because the interest graph talks to me about influences and media that I'm consuming and the stuff that I like, preferences, and these are very powerful indicators. Not just indicators of interest, but indicators of intent. And I believe that we're reaching a time where it'll be possible for us, for some company, to divine the intent of customers, really figure out what they're going to do next. And isn't that the holy grail of marketing? Isn't that really what you're spending money trying to do? Maybe have a little bit of influence on that. But if you could know what people are going to do next, that's going to happen in the interest graph. There are a whole bunch of startup companies focused on this. I'm working with 2 right now, companies that are developing new technology to help understand what the interest graph represents and then understand what the implications of it are. Now, these aren't 2 separate things. They're bound. There's a continuum here, right? It begins with communication and connections, and it goes through influence and consumption. But it goes all the way to consumption. For marketers and for media companies, that's what it's all about. How do you convert somebody to a buyer? This is not a new idea. It's been around for a very long time. Companies like Reddit and Dig have created those kind of social news readers, social news feeds. Companies like Yelp and TripAdvisor help us discover new places in our neighborhood, places to eat, places to go. Stumble Upon is a new way for us to discover content. It's been around for quite a few years now, about 7 or 8 years. And Foursquare, now very successful in that local space, and a bunch of competitors trying to do that as well. So this concept has been around for a while, this interest graph, this idea that if you can get people to express an interest, tell you a little bit about it, that can be converted into something that's fairly valuable for advertisers. What that's doing is it's going to cause a change to the way media buying works. This is a prediction I can stand by. We have a generation of media buyers who've been trained how to buy 30-second spots in television and radio. That's what they know how to do. They know what that converts to. They can take audience ratings and convert them into actual transactions and income for the company. We've been buying content as a proxy for audience for a very long time. We've been in that habit. You think about the way, for instance, if you were an advertiser that was selling cars and you had a new truck and you wanted to reach men, and you went to a newspaper, you'd have a conversation like this. Well, we got the sports section, the finance section, we got the auto section, and why not put your car in tech too? It's got some tech angle to it, right? There, that's men for you. That's how you buy men. You're buying an audience through content. So content serves as a proxy for audience. I believe that's going to change. With real-time, with the advent of real-time targeting, behavioral targeting, this is the white-hot center right now of advertising. With the advent of real-time behavioral targeting, you're now going to be able to reach a guy named Mark, who is male, 36 years old. He's into kayaking and yoga, and he intends to go to India to go pursue those 2 passions. And you can reach that guy and deliver the ad right to him when he's in market for those services. That's the shift. That's never been possible before. And through social media, it's going to start to show up in television. It's going to start to show up in magazines. Not through the print edition, not through the broadcast edition, but through those add-on applications. That's why there's so much activity in that space, to build on those ancillary activities that you do on a tablet while you're watching TV, while you're listening to music or something. That's because we're going to start to know who that audience is, predict what they're about to do next, and buy those eyeballs, buy that audience in real time and target a message directly to them. That'll yield massive efficiency for media buying. That'll change it. But we don't have those metrics yet. We don't know how to predict those conversion rates. Let me give you an example of where there's a little bit of room to improve here. This is Google. So before I came here, I did a little search. There's a tool you can, if you go to that link, google.com/ads/preferences/view, You can see what Google's tracking. This is all cookie-based, so it's not the most cutting-edge thing Google is doing. But they give you the opportunity to view it, and you can edit it. And so this is me. Look at it. It's actually pretty good. Arts and entertainment, absolutely. I'm a creative guy. Computers, yeah, I'm a geek. Sure, okay. Operating systems, Macintosh, they got that right. Online communities, sure, I'm into social media. And in fact, I was looking at Dropbox and a couple of services like SugarSync, and so they got that right. Like, they very accurately, they're tracking exactly what I'm looking at. And then I noticed this one thing that was a little weird, age 65. I'm like, whoa. And I thought, how did that happen? I'm not your typical like slacker kind of 27-year-old person hanging up, but like 65? What am I doing on the web? And I was racking my brains, and then it occurred to me, I was researching a project for baby boomers for the last month. One of my clients is working on a baby boomer project. And I realized, oh my gosh, that showed up as well. But you can see how crude this filter really is then, because just that's one project that I'm working on, but it popped up as part of my attributes now in the filter. And I didn't bother changing it, so I'm going to see what sort of retirement plan Google wants to offer me. Let me show you where they're going next, because this is actually a very powerful and very controversial move in social discovery. So a year ago, Google had a partnership with Twitter for real-time search results, because Twitter kind of opened up this new dimension called the real-time web. Google doesn't search that. Google searches documents. They're in the past. Twitter looks at the future, rather right now, what people are tweeting right this second. So Google had licensed that content. They created a brand new product called the real-time web, and then Twitter came back and said, guess what? We don't want to do that deal with you anymore. And so Google had built this product, but they lost the data. So Google kind of said, we're not doing that anymore. So they really started to crank up Google+. That's when they got into Google+. They said, we have to be in this space ourselves. We can't be dependent on an outside company. So recently, just a couple weeks ago, Google introduced this thing called Search plus Your World. And it was an enhancement to the Google search. It's very controversial. This is what a typical Google search looks like. So here I was searching about SOPA, that SOPA regulation I was telling you about. And then I logged into Google+. You can see that up at the top. See, I'm logged into Google+. At the top, that black bar, it shows that I'm in Plus. And all of a sudden, you see a couple of things that pop up on the screen. It changes the search. First, it shows me that I have 90 personal results from my own network of friends on Google+ that are relevant to that search. Second, on the right side, you can see that there are people and pages on SOPA on Google+. So people have actually posted stuff there, and so you can search that. That's what that right side module allows you to do. And notice what they're doing at the very bottom on the right. See how you could appear here. They're appealing to your desire for validation, right? Google gets how this stuff works. And then finally, here's a little one, a fellow I know named Reese Jones. It said he shared this. So here was a search result, and he had already shared it on Google+. And so they were kind of infiltrating their search results with ways for people to discover the benefits of Google+, at the same time giving some of those people who are active users some social proof, some social validation that says, hey, look, you're going to become a star when people do Google searches. Kind of a cool idea. Massive backlash from Facebook and Twitter. Massive backlash, because they're like, wow, you just disintermediated us. Google's polluting their search results with their own social network. Kind of an interesting reaction. But actually, Google didn't have any choice in the matter. Google has to, because they face the Facebook effect. Now, there's a book on the subject. I'm not talking about that book. The Facebook effect that I'm referring to is this. Facebook is starting to absorb an awful lot of the time that we spend on the internet. I mean, like crazy amounts of time. A fellow named Ben Elowitz is the CEO of Wet Paint, another social company, writes a very good blog, and he posted this a few months back. This is last fall. And he noted, see the blue line that's going up? That's Facebook. That's consumption of minutes, time spent on Facebook. And then if you look at the red line, that's the rest of the internet. It's going down. It went down 9% in 1 year. Literally. So people had this new habit that emerged, spending time on Facebook, and it came at the expense of all those other sites. I've run big publishing sites on the web, and I can attest to this effect. This was going on long before this guy posted this. I was aware of this as early as 2007. By 2009, it was a real chronic issue. We were torn. Should we put our content in Facebook? That's where the audience is. Or should we try to get that audience back to us? And gee, kind of Facebook's got a gravitational force field that pulls people deeper in. They don't really come back out of there. Check this out. This is more recent. Same thing by Ben Elowitz. This is their share of social networking sites. So now they're comparing Google Plus and Tumblr and Twitter to time spent on Facebook. And as you can see, Facebook's got a 95% share. So people are really spending an enormous amount of time. Google has no choice but to create Google+. They must participate in this category. Otherwise, an entire aspect of what people do on the internet is going to be invisible to their search engine. And it'll really render them irrelevant. That's a real challenge for Google. So they had to launch Plus. They had no choice. So this is the Facebook effect. It's a real issue. There's recently research published by Nielsen very good research about Nielsen, and they showed that the typical person looks at about 95 websites in a month, which is a lot more than I thought, but okay, 95 websites. And they look at almost 3,000 pages. They look at about 2,800 pages in that time every month. And 800 of those page views happen on Facebook. A third of the pages that we view happen on Facebook. This is extraordinary, right? So Facebook is like this Death Star, it's just absorbing time and attention on the internet, right? Social media fatigue, this is kind of the flip side of that issue. So if you spend a lot of time on Facebook, you're kind of going like, oh my God, I got to get a life and get me out of here, right? I do this for a living. I look at this stuff every week for my show, and for me, it's like, oh my gosh, all these companies want me to log in, set up a profile, check out our new social thing that does whatever. It's like, who's got the time? I feel like this half the time I'm working on my show. The issue is a signal-to-noise problem. Clay Shirky, who's a social media scientist based in New York, he is at NYU, recently said there's no such thing as information overload, there's just bad filters. It's a good point, right? So this is an opportunity. Again, it's not a threat. Someone needs to develop a better filter. It's just too much. And one way to look at it is if each thought, each tweet has some value, the more tweets you put out there, the less value you're going to have. It's like simple law of economics. If you flood the market with this stuff, each individual unit is going to be worth a little less. So there's a signal-to-noise ratio problem. And that is why we're starting to see these microsites like Path, Pinterest, and a lot of micro social networks pop up. And what's interesting is some of them are invitation only. Some of them are behind a pay barrier. You know, they're really trying to erect a wall around them so that they don't get flooded the way that Facebook is. So this could be potentially long-term a challenge to companies like Facebook. Final thought for you, the Facebook bank. I know this might sound a little crazy, but 20% of Facebook's revenue comes in the form of microtransactions. And those largely have to do with games. 350 million people on Facebook play social games. 350 million people play social games on Facebook. It's a big audience, right? Huge audience. And of them, a healthy percentage are actually reaching into their pockets and parting with their hard-earned currency in order to buy power-ups, in order to buy pink hair for their avatar, in order to buy virtual goods, virtual digital objects. Not actually real-world stuff that you can have and hold, just stuff that shows up on your screen while you're playing the game. But people spend real money on this stuff. And it's a real big chunk of Facebook's revenue. So Facebook introduced a thing called credits last year, and they forced all the social game companies to use it because some of the social game companies were creating their own kind of virtual currency. Facebook said, wait, we want that business. So now everybody on their platform is using Facebook credits. That means 350 million people have stored credit on Facebook. How long will it be before you can convert that stored credit into renting a movie, VOD, or downloading a music track, or some other digital object, but no longer a virtual one that actually has real benefit, you know, a show that you can watch or a music that you can listen to or something. And is it really such a stretch to imagine Google, or Facebook rather, creating a stored credit card that would allow you to go out in the real world and start to make transactions? Because when you have a base of 1 billion users worldwide, they could very swiftly turn into a bank. I know it sounds crazy, but this is a potential future for them. And trust me, the company is about to raise $5 billion, and they're going to have another currency called Facebook shares that's going to allow them to acquire all kinds of businesses, and they must get into another business besides advertising, because that's decelerating. So I wouldn't be at all surprised to see them make a move like this. So those are my 6 trends. So bonus round. In your handouts, you'll see a really nasty looking chart. It's my only ugly slide. And I'm going to go through that with you. It's the value control points. Let me first explain what I mean by this. So I wanted to give you guys a tool so that you could start to understand this landscape and see it the way I see it, through the lens that I see. When I look at this social media trends that are emerging, I try to think about the companies that are actually creating the ecosystem. The companies that are building kind of the foundation behind it. And you know what I mean by value control points, right? In traditional media, there are really 4 major value control points. Think about making a motion picture. If you want to make a movie, you need access to talent. Who has the talent? The agencies, right? The talent agencies. Why are they important? Because you can't make a movie without talent. You got to have talent. Talent's what opens the picture, right? So that's one value control point. And so the agencies are there to extract as much value out for their talent, for their clients as possible. The second one is financing. That's what movie studios do, right? They're like the investment banks of the creative business. They finance your picture. The studios don't actually make the pictures. That's what producers do. Studios finance them. So that's the second value control point. The third one's distribution, because if your picture gets made but it's not distributed, well, you haven't gotten it out, you're not going to make any money. And of course, the fourth one is marketing, although I'd say in all media today, that's one that's increasingly difficult to get. There's less dollars going into it than ever before, and so it's a challenge. But those are four of the major value control points. So companies that are successful usually dominate one or two of those, and then they extract as much value out of the ecosystem as they possibly can, and that's how they're profitable. Okay, so here's a question. What are the value control points in the world of two-way media? And here's my hint. It isn't those things. Those are from the old world, right? This is why traditional media companies have a very difficult time in this space, because all the leverage they think they bring to bear doesn't really get them very far in this space. It's not as powerful in this new space. So these are not the value control points. The value control points are in the handout that I gave you. Basically, you can summarize them as tools, monetization, platforms, and discovery. And what's interesting is all of these can be used on an optional basis by companies that want to participate in the ecosystem. Nobody's forcing you to use any of the tools. Nobody's forcing you to use their platform. You choose to do it freely. Same thing with consumers. The stuff is generally free to us, right? Free to us, but you can always upgrade if you want a paid version. That's possible. Or they're going to monetize you with advertising. So here we have the nasty looking chart that I told you about. I'll try to go through it quickly. What I want to do is just kind of cover these points fast. So the new value control points. The first one, tools for content creation and sharing. So consumer grade tools. Think about your Apple computer, right? One of the revolutionary things that Steve Jobs did when he returned to Apple is that he embedded in every machine, they shipped with tools for content creation. iPhoto, great way to create photos, and eventually a way to share them, right? And that's true now with Apple. You get all kinds of, you get word processing programs, and you get the soundtrack creating program, and a way to make web pages, and a way to make movies. It's kind of cool. So your computer now is like this little personal media creation device. So Apple is a very important company. Probably the most important company in this space, very powerful player in this space. They are a very big web company in addition to being a hardware company. Google also has a suite of tools. Picasa, think about it. They've got the Google Documents tools and so forth. Amazon, not so much. And then Facebook also has tools, right? Facebook primarily today is a photo sharing site. Do you know how many photos are shared on Facebook in a given month? It's astonishing. Anyone want to guess? Last year, how many photos were shared on Facebook? 40. So the answer was 20 billion. It's actually twice that. 40 billion photos shared. Think about that. And the thing about, like, in Twitter, in Flickr, maybe total they have 10 billion or 20 billion photos like that. Facebook is like a sidelight. They get that in a year. They get twice that amount. It's astonishing, right? So they are also a tool. They provide a tool. The second thing that all of these companies do is that they aggressively court developers. And they all have very serious tools and support systems for developers. They're very focused on developers, because developers are the ones that make the experiences that delight the customers and draw them into the platform. So that's a vital thing to do. All these companies are very good at that. Next one, tools for content discovery. So we talked about information overload. It's a theme you hear quite a lot. How do you find stuff? Well, search is one way. Helps if you know what you're looking for, right? Search is a great way to do it. Okay, the leader there is Google. Recommendation engines. Think about Amazon, right? The brilliance of Amazon is that recommendation engine. And also, the brilliance of Netflix. Some of the companies that are leaders in the space are great at kind of figuring out what you like and recommending more of it to you. Social discovery, newsfeed. This is what Facebook came out with. They kind of ripped off the idea from Twitter. They did a brilliant job of enhancing it so that you could share news stories and all sorts of other information, videos and so forth. So it's a personalized stream of information. And finally, an app store, which all three companies, Google, Apple, and Amazon all have. But weirdly, Facebook doesn't have an app store, which I can't figure out. So I'm assuming somebody somewhere in the machine is building one right now, because it doesn't make any sense. They have a lot of apps. It's just hard to find them. Next one's monetization. So these companies don't finance your production the way a movie studio, but what they do offer is a way for you to make money. And it's typically in the form of revenue share, and it's typically something on the order of a 30% split. They'll take 30%, you keep 70%, right? That's how app stores work. There's advertising systems. Certainly Apple and Google and Facebook all have unique advertising systems for their ecosystem. E-commerce and the ability to do paid downloads, that's an important one. Selling consumer data. See, this is an interesting thing. When you control these value control points, you get to decide where you take your margin, right? So if you have this whole system, this platform for distributing content, and people are creating content, and they're sharing content, and users are there consuming content, and so forth, you get to choose where you take your margin. And one place that Google and Facebook are able to take margin is by selling consumer data. There's a report that came out a week ago that your profile, your data that Google collects about you is worth from $50,000 to $5,000 to Google in terms of advertising revenue, or to companies that want that data. And so they license that data, they share that data out. So if you're using a free tool on the internet, you need to understand that you're not the customer, you're the product. Finally, hardware. Interesting to see Google buy Motorola this year, right? That was a big and strange acquisition. But it's quite clear that they see the margins that Apple gets on their hardware, and Google said, all right, we got to be in that business. So that's another way for them to make money. And of course, Amazon's done a good job, right? Launching a competitive tablet. First the Kindle, and then secondly their Fire, this competitive tablet. They're the only ones who seem to be competing with Apple on tablets. Federated identity, really this is a Google and a Facebook thing. You'll notice this on other websites that are starting to use those as a means of checking in and logging in and so on. So that means they get to extend their hegemony beyond their own platform and beyond the websites that they control. They're able to kind of track your behavior even when you're off their platform. There was a very controversial finding about Facebook where they track you even after you're logged out. They're tracking you around the web. That came out last year, controversial there. Infrastructure, so cloud infrastructure, everything's moving to the cloud, right? You notice this, there's no more video shops, there's no more places where you can go to buy records around your neighborhood anymore. You're gonna simply stream all that stuff off the web. That requires cloud infrastructure. All of these companies are leaders in it. They have gigantic data centers next to power plants or next to rivers or waterfalls. They're trying to be eco-friendly with that, but all four companies are leaders in infrastructure. And of course, infrastructure is a powerful one. It's a powerful value control point because once your content is hosted there, the switching cost, it's very hard to pull it out, right? It's a very high switching cost for you to extract your data once it's in that system. And the last one is devices for content consumption. That's kind of the end of it. Instead of like movie theater where you display a picture, here it's a device, it's a tablet, it's a computer. And so that actually has three layers to it. The client-side application, a reader, a web browser, or the proprietary operating system. You can see the different checks there. It's interesting to me that Facebook hasn't created a browser. They have a partnership with a company called RockMelt, and they've made kind of like a Facebook optimized browser, but it's weird that they haven't yet introduced a browser because it seems so obvious that that would be a way to take Facebook with you as you went around the web, and I'm quite certain millions of people would use it.
Thank you, Robert. Jeff Zedlar, Transcription Studio. Great stuff.
Thanks.
How far away do you think we are from targeting that person in that kayak?
Oh, we're very close. We're very, very close. It's happening now. It's a long discussion, but that is where all the growth is occurring. I talked to the head of one of the digital agencies in Europe last summer, so this was actually quite a while ago. And he said, look, it's quite clear to me from how we buy. This year, we're going to set aside 10% of our budgets, of all of our budgets. 10% will be set aside for real-time behavioral targeting. And next year, I can tell you already, 2012, it'll be 20 or 25% of our budget. And the following year, it'll be 35 to 50% of our budget. And the following, he said, I can see a path clearly where this will become 100% of our spending. All media will be social because all advertising will be behaviorally targeted.
Yeah, hi, that was great.
Thanks.
So last night we had a bunch of the metal guys and others running a lap around, what caused SOPA to be the pedal in the pond recently, and so it was mostly, musicians, filmmakers, technology guys.
Yeah.
But in the context that we're talking about here, where we're all sharing our stories, our for-profit stories, our not-for-profit stories, how we make a better world,
Yeah.
and that's content in that way, but it's participatory. But
Yeah.
what do you see in the future as we, create the future, as we invent the future together around how do we deal with who owns this content, who owns our stories?
Oh.
How do we share the value in that?
Yeah, that is a very good question. So the question is, who owns the content that you create? Everybody uses Facebook, right? Is there anyone here who doesn't use Facebook? So who owns your content on Facebook that you post? Yeah, they own it. So go do this.
Robert, I'm sorry, can I make an observation? The only person that raised their hand in the entire room was my wife in the corner. She's not on Facebook.
Okay, cool. So do this on Facebook sometime. Destroy your account. Try to destroy your account. Try to delete your account. And then what will happen, let's say a month goes by and you'll get that itch and craving comes back to you and you'll go back to Facebook and you'll set up an account. If you use the same email address, you're going to find all your stuff is still there. There'll be a 1 month gap because you were gone, but all the rest of the stuff going back, they don't take it down. So it's there. Kind of weird. Now, other companies are starting to realize that this is a marketing opportunity, right? So there's a phrase called data liberation rights. And I think consumers ought to make a bigger issue out of this, in my opinion, because it's our information. It isn't their information. I think Zuckerberg has done himself a tremendous disservice in terms of creating customer loyalty because he's made so many snarky comments about how stupid his users are in giving him this information. You know, giving it away for free and he gets to monetize it, right? So in my opinion, that's an opportunity for another company to come along. People always speculate, you know, will Facebook ever be challenged? Will there be another Facebook? Well, you know, there was Friendster before there was MySpace, and there was MySpace before there was Facebook. And before all of that, there was GeoCities. These were all successful companies in their time, and they all last about 5 or 6 years, and then they taper off. Facebook, it's 7 years old. Is it at its zenith? Will it continue to grow like a juggernaut? Who knows? If they continue to mistreat their customer and engender ill will and distrust, I guarantee you they will destroy their brand. And that is a huge opportunity for Google. And Google is making the right noises, but Google has a creepy factor too. And so sometimes you're not quite sure where they err, right? And this whole thing I was showing you a minute ago about Google search plus your world freaked out a lot of people, and so they launched a new site called Don't Be Evil, a new app called Don't Be Evil that took that stuff out of your browser when you're conducting a search. So that was kind of clever. Anyway, it's an opportunity for a company to position itself. I believe the data belongs to you. Yeah.
Is there any place that we could, small business owners could go, that could use certain tools? I mean, that's obviously a tool that you're using, right?
Yeah.
And then like for Facebook or,
Yeah.
you know, in other words, to be able to, you know what I'm talking about.
Well,
to be able to hone
there's two
those.
answers to your question. So the first thing is, which tool should you use to connect with customers, right?
Yeah,
That's one.
correct.
And mainly your question is about time because you can't do all of these things. So which is the right one for you? The second question, though, is are there special social tools for businesses? And the answer is absolutely yes. So there are things like Yammer that are designed to create, you know, a social network within a company where, you know, you don't want your staff like talking about the company out in Facebook in public or out in Google Plus, you know. So Yammer's created kind of like private social networking for businesses. So there are tools for sure that will help companies. That's one answer. That's one possible answer. And I would search on Mashable. It's by far the best source of information, or the Next Web. There are several sites that cover these topics in depth, and they can give you some examples of the companies that do it. In terms of how you spend your time as a small business owner, knowing that you can't cover every single base, you got a real challenge, right? Because you don't know where your customers are, and you have to really think about that. So as I've been listening to Simon here this week, the last couple of days, I've been thinking about that very thing myself, saying, all right, here's a guy who's an advertiser, basically, right? You're an advertiser, you have a message, you want to get it out, you don't have time. And now here we've got all these people who are blogging and writing and tweeting, and I'm thinking to myself, well, hang on a second. Couldn't you sponsor some of them and get your message out that way? And surely you could. I work with a fellow who's doing this in a very clever way, Jason Calacanis. He might know. He's an entrepreneur here in Los Angeles. He's a multi kind of entrepreneur. He's launched many companies. He's a very flamboyant and outspoken figure with lots of opinions. And so he created his own talk show called This Week in Startups. And now he's launched a series of talk shows. I do one, This Week in Social Media. And he has sponsors, and it's like the early days of television. He has 2 sponsors. They're built into his show. He talks about them. And his rule about sponsorship is whoever the host of the show is has to actually use the tool and talk about the tool in a positive way. To me, this is a really powerful way to use social media, right? So your message gets out there. You're getting an endorsement from somebody that people trust, so you get that credibility transfer happening. But you don't actually have to do the work, because that's why you're spending the ad dollars, right? Now, that said, you do need to use these tools. You do need to get active, and you do need to follow people as well. So you also have to consume some content, and it is a time investment. I think it's obligatory. But try to find the people who are in your category already and see if you can't turn them into kind of a NASCAR driver with a patch on their shoulder with your logo on it. It's a way to go. I think we have a better world right now. I think it's already happening. I'm personally convinced of that. I know it's a controversial opinion, but let me explain it. If you look outside of our country, we have a bad moment right now, right? Since 2008, a very bad time in this country. And we've had terrorism and war for 10 years. So it's also coming at the end of a very long period of bad news in this country. And it's also, we've been very divided as well. So in the United States right now, if you were to take a snapshot at this point in time, you might say, gee, times are tough. It's true. That's true. But now zoom out a little bit and look at the whole world. In the last 10 years, about 400 million people have been lifted out of poverty. In the last 10 years, the number of people, number of people who die, mothers who die giving birth, has actually gone down. The number of people lifted out of illiteracy has gone up. Every single metric that you can track has improved for humanity. That's an important data point. But then you might say, well, yeah, sure, but look, we're degrading the planet and we're using up the resources. I heard one of you, I think the fellow sitting next to you brought that point up a minute ago, right? Gee, people are spending so much time in social media that they're not paying attention to the real world that they live in and the air that they actually breathe. I disagree. I think there's more awareness of the degraded environment because of tools like social media than ever before. And it's not just that. There's more awareness of overreaching authoritative governments than ever before. Go on YouTube and do a search for police brutality. And you'll be stunned at what you see. In 11 states in this country, the police department tried to ban the opportunity for somebody to videotape a policeman doing his job. They tried to make that illegal. They used some of the laws that were passed in the wake of 9/11, some of the anti-terrorism laws or anti-wiretapping laws that were introduced. And they tried to use those as a pretext to stop a citizen from using a video camera in their phone to videotape a public servant on a public street doing the job that citizens pay for. They tried to make that illegal, and in a couple of states they arrested people and they brought them to trial, and the judges threw the cases out. We live in a time where people can take action. We live in a time where truly that phrase that we used in the 1960s, when the hippies were kind of protesting in Chicago and the Chicago police force came in with batons and started beating. Remember that? The Republican convention there in 1968? Or Democratic convention, rather. It was really a brutal thing. Mayor Daley was repressive and so on. And the phrase they used then, if you watch those clips, it's really stirring to see people take to the streets in public action. The phrase they used then, the chant was, "The whole world is watching. The whole world is watching," right? That was the phrase that they used. It's really cool to watch that today, right? Now, at the time, they meant the whole world was watching because there were news crews with cameras videoing. Fair enough. Today, it's literally true that the whole world is watching. Anyone can capture video footage with the technology that Packet Video, my company, created. That's embedded in hundreds of millions of cell phones around the world. Everybody has the opportunity to be an investigative journalist, and millions of people are using that. So go do that search on YouTube and you'll see. I believe that we live in a time of tremendous opportunity. I believe that it's right to be optimistic. I'm an optimist, and I have conviction. I'm faithful about my ability to influence that. And the way you influence it is two things: action and communication.